The chandelier crashed against the silence like thunder trapped in crystal. "Who gave you permission to touch that bracelet?" The voice sliced through the ballroom, sharp, cold, unforgiving. Guests turned. Silver forks paused mid-air. And in the center of the glittering hall stood Clara Jennings, clutching a small velvet box, as if it might shield her from the 100 eyes now burning into her skin. She hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't even opened it. The box had simply slipped from the overflowing table of gifts, landing by her feet. But in this place of diamonds and silk appearances mattered more than truth. A man stepped forward, his suit darker than midnight, his eyes like polished steel. Richard Davenport, heir to one of the most powerful medical empires in the country. He looked at Clara not with curiosity, but with the disdain of a judge passing sentence. "You don't belong here," he said, and in that moment Clara knew her life was about to change forever. At 6 each morning, the city still yawned. Streetlights blinked, delivery trucks sighed. And Clara Jennings laced up her thrift store sneakers, the soles patched with tape, and stepped into a day that asked more than it ever gave back. She worked the early shift at a neighborhood diner 2 bus lines from downtown. She liked the quiet before the coffee pots hissed the way sunlight crawled across the chrome the regulars who tipped in quarters and stories. Clara kept a small ritual. Before tying her apron, she reached into her pocket and touched 2 things. A brass locket, warm from her skin, with a sun-faded photograph of a woman she barely remembered, and a hospital bracelet, the kind that snaps soft against the wrist. The bracelet had her baby name on it. Not the last name she grew up with, but another name, a different line, a different possibility. No one ever explained it. No one dared. The locket and the bracelet were her compass. Proof that there was a before she did not understand, and a truth she might never afford to find. Money was a map of red lines. Rent due on the 1st, utilities on the 10th, bus pass loaded in $5 clumps. Her mother's prescriptions sorted by day and hour, placed in a plastic pillbox that clicked like a metronome. On good weeks, Clara slept 6 hours a night. On bad weeks, she slept in pieces, 2 hours between the late shift and the morning opening, an hour on the bus, 10 minutes in a chair by her mother's bed when the coughing slowed. "Take a breath," her manager would say, sliding a pot of coffee into her hands. "You look pale, kid." Clara would nod, poor smile. She moved fast. She remembered orders without writing them down. She refilled cups before a hand waved. Her tips were modest, but her gratitude was real. She was careful to count change twice. Careful to be kind. Careful not to cry where anyone could see. Home was a second-floor walk-up with a stubborn front door and a stair that creaked on the 3rd step. The living room held a threadbare sofa, a quilt mended with mismatched fabric, a slow fan. On the wall, a corkboard carried appointment cards and a single watercolor Clara had painted in high school, a bridge over still water, a reflection so precise it calmed her just to look at it. She had talent, a teacher once said. She also had bills the teacher did not need to add. Her mother Ruth wore her pain like a polite coat she could not take off. Some days were better. Some days were not. On the worst afternoons, Ruth would squeeze Clara's hand and whisper, "I am sorry you have to be the strong one." Clara would kiss her mother's forehead and reply, "It is only for a while." She did not define while. She did not tempt hope with a date. There were small mercies. A jar of soup left by the neighbor downstairs. A bus driver who waited an extra beat when he saw Clara running. A free apple from the corner grocer when the bruises made it unsellable. Clara kept those kindnesses in the same pocket as the locket. She believed in storing what was good. On Sundays, if tips stretched, she bought a single lily from the florist who closed at noon. She trimmed the stem with a dull knife and set the bloom in a jar by the kitchen window. The lily lifted the room. It lifted Clara. A reminder that beauty like breath did not cost much when you held it close. She did not have time for parties. She did not have a dress for ballrooms. But an invitation arrived anyway. A heavy envelope. A familiar handwriting. Maggie Cole, the girl from 3 doors down, who used to braid Clara's hair on the front stoop, who studied with a ferocity that made teachers lean in, who left for a world of white coats and polished floors. Maggie was marrying into the Davenport family, the same Davenports whose name curved above a hospital wing and a research institute, the same Davenports who set the price of mercy and called it medicine. Come, Maggie wrote. Please, you are my past and my luck. I want you there. Clara traced the ink with her thumb and felt old summers rise like heat from pavement. She said yes. She borrowed a simple navy dress from a cousin. She ironed it on a towel. She mended a loose hem with 3 careful stitches. She polished a pair of flats with a cotton shirt. She placed the locket under the neckline. She tucked the hospital bracelet deep in her pocket. She promised herself she would stand tall, eat a small piece of cake, hug her friend, and slip out before midnight. That morning, before the bus, she paused at the mirror. The woman looking back was not glamorous, but her eyes were steady, her hair pinned in a neat twist, her shoulders set. One night she told her reflection, "Be gracious, be invisible. Come home." She locked the door behind her and counted the steps to the street. 1, 2, 3. The 3rd step creaked. It always did. She took that sound with her, the small music of her real life. At the bus stop, the wind lifted the edge of her dress. She held the locket through the cloth and felt the curve of the metal, the pulse beneath. Across town, chandeliers waited. Across town, a name waited. Davenport. She did not know that the night would not let her be invisible. She did not know that a velvet box would fall, that a voice would cut the room, that a man would look at her as if judging the distance between worlds. She only knew this: she had done nothing wrong. She would keep her head. She would leave early. She would be back in time to refill her mother's evening pillbox and set the lily in a fresh water that she thought would be enough. The Davenport estate rose from the edge of the city like something out of another century, columns white as bone, a roof line sharp against the evening sky, windows glowing with light that looked more like command than welcome. Guests arrived in black cars that whispered along the driveway, attendants in uniforms opening doors, offering polite bows. Every detail announced, here is power, here is permanence. Inside the grand ballroom stretched 2 stories high chandeliers like constellations suspended in crystal. A string quartet played with the kind of perfection that made silence itself seem clumsy. Waiters in white gloves moved like shadows, trays of champagne glasses shimmering. The women wore gowns that caught the light like water diamonds at their throats, like tiny suns. The men carried themselves with the heavy ease of people who never worried about the price of time. This was the Davenport World Medicine turned Empire Hospitals, stamped with the family name research centers, bearing their crest wings of libraries and museums purchased with a signature. To the city, they were philanthropists. To their peers, they were royalty. To outsiders, they were untouchable. At the heart of it all stood Richard Davenport, eldest son surgeon, by training heir by blood. He wore his tuxedo like armor, his posture a line drawn in granite, his face handsome in a severe way, rarely softened. The staff called him Dr. Davenport, even in private. Patients whispered about his brilliance, his coldness, his refusal to offer anything more than skill. To his family, he was the torchbearer, the one expected to carry their name into another generation. Richard lived under the weight of 2 shadows. The first, his mother, Eleanor Davenport, a woman whose presence filled any room. Draped in Chanel pearls at her throat, her voice low and exact, she had a gift for turning compliments into commands. Richard stand straighter. Richard smile less. Power is not charm. It is gravity. The second shadow, his failed marriage, a scandal whispered about in corners, never spoken aloud in his presence. To his family, the solution was simple: find a new wife, someone appropriate, someone who could restore the image of perfection. And so, at the very wedding of Maggie Cole and Richard's cousin Eleanor's campaign intensified. She cornered him near the orchestra, gesturing toward a young woman in silk. "Her family has been summering in Nantucket for 6 generations," she murmured. "She will bring stability. You will bring heirs. This is not complicated." Richard's jaw tightened. His life had become a negotiation. He had no voice in a series of transactions dressed as tradition. Around them, the ballroom glittered. Champagne, laughter, the pop of a cork, the rustle of gowns. But Richard's eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for air. And then he saw her. Clara standing alone near a towering floral arrangement, her navy dress modest, her shoes plain, her eyes both terrified and unbowed. She looked out of place, yes, but she also looked like the only other person who didn't belong. It was not affection he felt in that instant. Not attraction. It was recognition. She was cornered just as he was. And in her defiance, he saw a mirror of his own. But the Davenport world did not allow mercy. It was not built on kindness. It was built on hierarchy, on bloodlines, on wealth that decided worth. To everyone else in that room, Clara was no guest. She was an intruder in borrowed shoes. And it would only take one careless moment to prove it. A glass slipped. A velvet box toppled from the gift table. It landed by her feet. She bent to pick it up, polite, instinctive. But when she straightened, the music faltered. Conversations stilled. "Who gave you permission to touch that bracelet?" a voice rang out, and the world turned toward her. The ballroom froze. Even the violins seemed to stumble. All eyes locked on Clara, standing with the velvet box in her trembling hands. She had only meant to return it to the table, but in this world of sharp gazes and whispered judgments, intent did not matter. Richard's cousin, half drunk on whiskey and entitlement, strode forward. His bow tie hung loose, his cheeks flushed with arrogance. "I don't believe we've met." He slurred, his smile more a sneer than a greeting. His eyes ran over Clara as if she were something to be appraised, not someone. "Which catering company did you say you worked for? Fetch me another scotch, will you?" The insult was a dagger twisted by the laughter that bubbled from a nearby group. Clara's face burned. She wanted to vanish into the marble floor, to flee back to her bus stop, her quiet apartment, her mother's steady breathing in the night. But her feet rooted in place, shame wrapping her tighter than steel. Richard moved then. He excused himself from his mother mid-sentence, ignoring her raised brow. His stride cut through the crowd with the precision of a man used to commanding operating rooms. He stopped at Clara's side, his presence blotting out the jeers. He didn't so much as glance at his cousin, his eyes cool and steady locked on hers. "Pretend to be my wife," he whispered, his voice low enough for only her to hear. What she breathed, the word catching in her throat. "Play along," he murmured. His hand closed gently but firmly around hers, the warmth of his touch startling. "I'll make it worth your while." Before she could protest, he turned toward the stunned onlookers. His voice, smooth as silk and loud enough to carry, cut the tension cleanly. "Mother, he said I'd like you to finally meet my wife. This is Clara. We had hoped to keep it a secret, but—" He let the pause linger, a master performer on his stage. There's no time like the present. A ripple of gasps tore through the crowd. Eleanor Davenport's hand flew to her pearls. The arrogant cousin blinked, stupefied, the Scotch glass wobbling in his grip. Richard lifted Clara's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with the polish of a man accustomed to scrutiny. But his eyes never left hers. "Darling," he said softly, "I believe they're playing our song." And just like that, the room shifted. For the rest of the night, Clara lived in a fiction too convincing to untangle from truth. Richard never left her side. His hand rested at the small of her back with a possessive intimacy that sent sparks racing down her spine. He whispered observations that made her laugh despite herself. They danced, and in his arms she felt impossibly safe. But safety was fragile. In the eyes of Eleanor Davenport, suspicion hardened. And behind every polite smile from the glittering guests, Clara felt the weight of judgment. She was not one of them. She would never be one of them. The masquerade could not last. It ended at midnight. Outside the hotel's glowing doors, under the cool wash of streetlight, Richard released her hand. His eyes, unreadable once more, flicked toward the waiting black car. "You were convincing," he said. "You're not a bad actor yourself," Dr. Clara replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced. He slipped a sleek black business card into her hand. "I'll be in touch." Then, without another word, he stepped into the car and was gone. Clara stood alone on the curb, the card cold between her fingers, her reflection caught in the dark glass of the retreating limousine. What in the world had just happened? She returned home to her reality, the smell of frying oil at the diner, the rattle of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, her mother's fragile health. Yet the memory of chandeliers and his hand at her back clung to her like perfume she could not wash away. Days later, the diner door opened. A hush fell, just as it had in the ballroom. Richard Davenport, in a dark tailored suit, stepped inside. He did not wait to be seated. He did not glance at the wide-eyed patrons. His gaze found only Clara. "Miss Jennings," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "we have business to discuss." And in the quiet corner booth that afternoon, he laid out a proposal that would shatter the fragile boundaries of her world. A contract. A year-long arrangement. An offer she could not refuse unless she was willing to sacrifice everything she loved. It was not an invitation. It was a trap, and Clara knew the moment she signed her life would never be her own again. Clara stared at the tablet on the diner's table, her fingertips still trembling from where it had pressed the signature line. One word glowed on the screen. Accepted. Richard Davenport sat across from her, his posture composed, his gray eyes as precise as the scalpel he wielded in operating rooms. From this moment forward, he said evenly, "You are my wife. In the eyes of the public, you will attend functions, dinners, and galas by my side. In return, your mother will have the best care this country can offer." Clara swallowed hard. She thought of her mother's thin hands, her quiet apologies, the way hospital bills had piled like bricks against their front door. She thought of the locket in her pocket, the photo inside so faded it was little more than shapes. She thought of the hospital bracelet, the name on it not Jennings, but another word she had never spoken aloud. 2 weeks later, she was living in the east wing of Richard's penthouse. She had gowns hung in closets wider than her old bedroom jewelry on loan, worth more than she had ever earned in a decade. But every night when she undid her borrowed diamonds, she touched the locket hidden beneath her pillow. It was her anchor, her only proof that she belonged to a world before this arrangement. It was at one of Eleanor Davenport's luncheons that the first crack split the surface. The ballroom was filled with women who wore wealth like perfume, their laughter delicate, their words sharpened to cut. Clara smiled, nodded, endured. But then Eleanor's gaze landed on the locket chain peeking from beneath her dress. "Where did you get that?" Eleanor asked. The room hushed as if the question carried weight beyond curiosity. Clara's hand instinctively covered the charm. "It was my mother's," she said softly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "May I see it?" Clara hesitated. The air in the room tightened. Reluctantly, she drew the chain over her head and placed it in Eleanor's palm. The older woman's fingers froze, her breath caught audibly. For the first time since Clara had met her, Eleanor's face, always a mask of command, cracked. "This locket," Eleanor whispered. She opened it. Inside, the faded photo seemed to blaze in her gaze. A man and a woman, young, smiling, and in the woman's arms a newborn with eyes wide open. Eleanor's hands shook. Richard stepped forward. "Mother." Eleanor looked at him, then at Clara. The pearls at her throat seemed to choke her. This cannot be." "What are you talking about?" Richard pressed his voice taut. Eleanor's eyes darted to Clara, then to the bracelet she now noticed slipping from Clara's pocket as she shifted nervously. Eleanor snatched it up, her lips parting in a gasp. She read the name engraved in plastic, a name that was not Jennings. Her voice, when it came, was a rasp that silenced every whisper in the room. Clara, Jennings, you are not who you think you are. That bracelet, this locket, belonged to my daughter. The room spun. Clara's knees nearly buckled. What she whispered. Eleanor's eyes glistened with something Clara had never imagined she would see in them: tears. My daughter was born 26 years ago. She died. Or so I was told. But this, she held up the bracelet, trembling. This proves she lived. You, Clara, you are my granddaughter. The luncheon erupted. Gasps, cries, glasses tipping. But Clara heard none of it. Her world shrank to the pounding of her heart and the cold certainty that everything she had ever known, her name, her past, her place in the world, was a lie. The contract, the dinners, the masquerade, none of it mattered anymore, because Clara Jennings was not just a waitress who had stumbled into the wrong ballroom. She was a Davenport by blood, and the truth had been buried for 26 years. For 3 nights after the luncheon, Clara barely slept. The penthouse walls felt like a cage of glass, each reflection showing a face she no longer recognized. She had grown up, Clara Jennings, waitress, daughter, survivor. Now Eleanor Davenport claimed she was blood family legacy. But why had the truth been buried for decades? On the 4th night, an envelope appeared on her dresser. Heavy cream paper, her name written in Eleanor's hand. Clara hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a letter. My dearest child, it began. 26 years ago, my daughter Margaret gave birth to a baby girl. There were complications. The doctor returned with tears in his eyes and said the child had not survived. We grieved. We buried an empty casket. But I see now we were deceived. Clara's fingers trembled. The letter went on. Your mother, Ruth, was a nurse in the maternity ward that night. She vanished soon after. At the time, we believed it was grief that drove her away. Now I fear it was love. She must have known the truth that you were alive. She must have taken you to protect you from the storm of wealth, expectation, and control that awaited you in our world. Clara dropped the letter as if it burned. Her mother, her gentle, weary Ruth. The woman who had held her hand through every fever, every heartbreak. The woman who had apologized for being a burden. Could she have been carrying this secret all along? The next morning, Clara went home. The old stair creaked on the 3rd step, just as it always had. In the living room, Ruth sat in her worn chair, a blanket across her lap, her face pale but her eyes steady. You know, Clara whispered. Ruth closed her eyes. A tear slipped free. I hoped. I prayed. This day would never come. Why, Clara's voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Ruth reached for the locket, the same locket Clara had carried her entire life. Because they would have taken you from me, she said softly. You were born into a family of power, Clara. Power that swallows people whole. I could not let them swallow you. Clara sank to her knees. So it's true. Eleanor is my grandmother. I'm a Davenport. Ruth cupped her face with frail hands. You are my daughter. That is all that matters. Blood is a thread. Love is the cloth. But Richard's arrival shattered the fragile peace. He filled the doorway in his tailored suit, his presence too large for the small apartment. His eyes swept the room, falling on Ruth, then on Clara. It's true, he said quietly. I had the hospital records pulled, the bracelet, the signatures. You are one of us, Clara, and it was hidden, buried for reasons we still don't understand. Ruth's voice trembled. Reasons. The reason is standing right in front of me. Your family deals in contracts, in control. They would have owned her life before she ever took her first step. Richard flinched as if struck. His own words from the contract came back to him. Love is a liability, Emotions are variables I will not entertain. He had written those rules to keep himself safe, but hearing Ruth's truth, he saw the cruelty of it reflected in his own life. Clara. He said, his voice raw. I thought I was protecting myself with rules. But maybe I've been doing exactly what my family always has, choosing control over love. And it has destroyed us. Clara looked between them, her frail mother who had risked everything to protect her, and the man who had pulled her into his world with a contract that forbade the very thing now burning between them. Tears blurred her vision. Do you see, Richard? The same walls that suffocated your life are the ones that stole mine. We've both been prisoners of the Davenport name. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. Then let's break free. Both of us. No contracts, no lies. His eyes glistened. Clara, I can't. His voice faltered. I can't stop feeling for you, and it terrifies me more than anything in this world. Her tears fell hot on her cheeks. Then maybe terror is what love is supposed to feel like. The room went silent, thick with the weight of truths long buried and emotions long denied. Ruth, trembling but resolute, reached for both their hands and drew them together. This family, she whispered, has lived on lies long enough. If you want a future, you must build it on truth, even if it breaks everything else. For the first time, Richard did not pull away, his fingers laced with Clara's, and in that fragile grip was the beginning of something neither of them could deny any longer. The empire of wealth and secrecy was crumbling around them. But in its ruin, a new foundation was being laid, one of love, of risk, of defiance, and none of their lives would ever be the same again. The days that followed moved like a tide, carrying Clara into a world she had never asked to enter, and one she could no longer deny. Newspapers printed her name. Whispers bloomed in ballrooms and boardrooms alike, the lost Davenport granddaughter. Some called it scandal, others called it destiny. But Clara did not feel like either. She felt like a woman torn between two truths. At night, she sat by her mother's bedside listening to Ruth's steady breathing, her hand still frail but warm in Clara's grasp. In the quiet, she was Clara Jennings, the daughter who grew up counting bus fare and lilies on a kitchen table. By day, when Richard guided her through corridors of marble and light introducing her as family, she was Clara Davenport, heir to a legacy built on power and secrets. And somewhere in between those two names, she was simply herself. Richard stood beside her one evening on the penthouse balcony, the city sprawling out like a sea of stars. His voice was low, unguarded. The contract is broken. We both know that. But what comes next? Clara, that's not just my choice. It's yours. She looked at him, her heart twisting. His eyes, once cold and clinical, now carried a raw, fragile hope. Behind him, the skyline shimmered indifferent. For a long moment, neither spoke. The truth hung between them. They had both been shaped by lies, but love, terrifying, unpredictable love, was the one thing that could not be written into a contract or hidden in a locket or buried by power. Clara turned her gaze back to the city, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Was family a matter of blood, or of the choices we make? Was love strong enough to heal decades of secrets? She did not answer, not yet. Instead, she held the question close, letting it rest where her locket lay against her skin. And she knew the answer would not only change her life, but his as well. So I ask you, if you were, Clara, would you forgive the lies and choose love? Or would you walk away from the empire that nearly swallowed you whole? The choice, dear listener, is yours to ponder.